Welcome back. I'm going to give you another little story to think about. There's a doctor in Tokyo. He sees a patient who's been exposed to a virus. Everybody else in his household got sick, had fever, cough, and fatigue. This one patient, nothing, not a single symptom. So the doctor runs tests. Immune system, strong. The markers are all strong. Inflammation, low. Gut microbiome, explosively diverse. And that's the mystery researchers are now obsessed with. Why do some people get sick while others stay resilient? And why does that answer often lie in our gut? And today we're going to explore the microbiome itself and immunity, and why your gut might be the most important immune organ you've never thought about. Last week we talked about the gut-brain interaction, and it's such an important thing that seems to be driving our lives. What we thought about today is we'd focus in specifically on the microbiome of the gut, and that's where we are.
I think it's fantastic. And welcome back to another episode of Neuroscience Digest, powered by my BrainWise coach. I am Bastian.
And I'm Phil Dixon.
And we are thrilled that you are here again for another discussion around the latest and greatest research that's happening in the field of neuroscience. And then Phil helps us apply it to our daily life and experience so that we might be able to get some digestible information out of it, which is kind of a pun considering we're talking about the gut today. I didn't plan that. Was not intentional, but it works perfectly. If you are enjoying, you what?
I love that joke, so thank you, Cole.
That was perfect, right? And if you are enjoying this conversation and you're getting something out of it and you're having fun, give us a 5-star review and rating wherever it is that you get your podcast. Subscribe, like, comment, share, follow us on all of our social media platforms. We're on all of them: TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, because it really does help others begin to also find this amazing BrainWise community that we're growing in our podcast group. So please do that for us, because we certainly want to continue growing this BrainWise friendship and community that we are continuing to go along together. So Phil, you've given the team, or our BrainWise friends, really, a little bit of an intro into terms of where we're going today, but why don't you give us a little bit more of the details around what we're going to explore specifically in this area of immunity and the microbiome?
Absolutely. And so if I say the word immunity to most people, you're probably going to think of something that's generally in the body, in the bloodstream. And we talk about white blood cell count, antibodies, inflammation, all those type of things. And we've got a sort of sense of that it's doing something. But 70% of that immune system actually lies in your gut lining. And your microbiome trains it, regulates it, and sometimes even overrides it. And what we're going to explore is how microbes shape the immune response, why inflammation often begins in the gut, how our diet and lifestyle influence it all, and what's the research saying about how it impacts resiliency as we age. So that's what we're about today.
Really quick, Phil, my dogs are, give me 1 second. I'm going to go put them up because they're about to start barking.
Okay.
Tell us, go to bed. They were good all the way up until the end. Okay. All right, let me pull up the... Okay. And so, Phil, I think it's a fascinating conversation, and our BrainWise friends, I think, are going to get a lot of really good information out of this discussion. And so, you've mentioned before, or some of the research has, presented as well, is that the gut is an immune kind of training ground. So, or perhaps like a boot camp for microbiome. Can you share what that means and give some details as to kind of the overall understanding?
The detail is still a little fuzzy for some of it, for me particularly, maybe not for a biologist who's doing this research. But the gut simply is a large immune organ in addition to everything else. It every day, probably every moment, maybe every second, well, it's deciding what's safe, what's dangerous, what needs to be attacked, and what can be tolerated. And the microbes are the instructors in this whole boot camp, if you like. They train the immune cells to distinguish friend from foe. Now, fascinating. Last week, we talked about mice. We're going to talk about mice again. By the way, what happens in mice seems to reflect about 99% of what happens in humans. And that's why it's interesting in studying mice. It's not just a
I
bizarre.
do have to say, Phil, I'm still not thrilled about the relationship or the comparison between me and a mouse, but go ahead.
In Douglas Adams' view, he worked on the fact that the mice were the most important things on the planet. And they had the answer to everything, which was 42. They're pretty important creatures.
As long as they're not in my house, I'm fine.
You got it. But what they did a study back, and this was reported on in 2020, they did a study that germ-free mice that have been grown without microbes in a very, what do they call it, sanitary environment, they have underdeveloped immune systems. So it seems there's something about the microbes and the immune systems that are very interactive. So what they found is that in those mice, their immune cells are, they call it naive. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to behave. They're confused and they get easily overwhelmed. And so the microbes seem to be in a position where they teach the immune system and they teach it nuance of what's right, what's wrong to do. And without them, the immune system becomes either too weak and gets overwhelmed, or it's too aggressive and begins inflammation. And so that's the part. How do you get the microbiome to be back in, I don't want to say that we control it because it controls us, but into a more sort of regular, normal position?
Right. And we also know that there's a relationship between, what you're just describing and inflammation. And so where does inflammation begin? And then, give us some details around, what chronic inflammation might actually do to us physically.
It's funny because we always talk about the gut lining. And I'd say to everybody before I make my next announcement, what do you think? How thick is the gut lining? Do you think of it as like the rubber that might be lining the bottom of your pond or something like that? It's 1 cell thick. It's thinner than human hair. And it's supposed to be tight, very selective in what it does, and protective of what happens. 1 cell thick is not difficult to break. So what can happen is stress, diet, alcohol, ultra-processed foods, all of those things can break that one barrier. 1 cell thick barrier. And when that happens, you get bacterial fragments leak into the bloodstream. That's not a good thing. So what happens is when that happens, the immune system starts to get crazy. It starts to get things inflamed, not because of the infection, because of miscommunication of what's going on. And its job is to try and close that gap. This inflammation has been connected with depression, anxiety, cardiovascular disease, autoimmune disorders, all these things. And I'm going to take a wild ass guess. Oh, not supposed to say that. A wild guess here. And that is, there's lots of things that are caused by the fact that we've got a leaky barrier in our gut.
And one of the things, Phil, that I think is fascinating about this conversation is how truly important the microbiome or the microbes become in the overall immune response. And some might call them, the peacekeepers, regulators, diplomats. But tell us a little bit immune response, and some they might use that distinction.
They, as you said, there are diplomats. The microbes, if they're functioning and you've got a diverse set of them, they actually can calm the immune system down. Whereas the immune system, as I said, goes crazy and gets all the inflammation stuff going, microbes, some of them are calming, some of them act as alarm bells, but in general, they're in control of what's going on. What we need is when we absorb fiber, the microbes actually ferment that fiber and they produce anti-inflammatory molecules. And that strengthens the gut barrier again if it's leaked. It reduces the inflammatory aspects. It regulates a whole bunch of things, which I won't go into, and it helps to improve our immune tolerance. So it's one of the reasons why fiber is not just good for digestion. Everybody said that. I'm sure everyone's grandmother used to say that. It's also an immune intervention so that you can actually increase your immune system by increasing your fiber intake.
Well, and on that note, specifically, you just talked about fiber intake. Tell us a little bit about, the diet, immunity, and the microbiome. What should we be thinking about in terms of what we should eat? I mean, we talked a little bit about this in our previous discussion, but, just reinforce for us what is important for our BrainWise friends to be thinking about.
Let's talk food for a moment, because I know chocolate is one of your favorites, and ice cream, I think, comes in a close second, or maybe it's the other way around.
Pretty close.
We'll go with both of those two. That's not what your immune system wants to eat. So your immune system needs to eat what your microbes want. And fermented foods, we mentioned that last week, things like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, all those type of things. That's what microbes love to eat. Those fermented foods reduce inflammation in general. The fiber produces all sorts of wonderful byproducts. Also, berries, tea, olive oil, those type of things, they are all beneficial for the microbes.
Just really interesting. And I think, it's important when we talk about this is obviously we're not saying that you can't eat, chocolate or ice cream or whatever, or, some things that might be more processed in nature, but what does the balance look like? And are we giving our microbiomes the foods that they do need, and then, eating the others in, moderation? I think I remember we had a podcast guest who was on, Phil, Susan, and she talked a little bit about this and how she had a bag of Skittles, but of course she was, eating the Skittles in moderation. And I think it was to help keep her awake on a drive or something, but everything I think is okay in moderation.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And that moderation is much lower than you might think. I remember talking to a neuroscientist who said in the afternoon, sometimes you need to get some energy. Long-term energy comes out of things like protein and almonds and stuff like that. And he said, if you need a real hit of getting glucose quickly, then a jelly bean. And I went, you mean jelly beans? And he went, no, a jelly bean.
Who's ever eaten just one jelly bean?
That was my point. That's my point as well. But the point is we tend to think, oh, I'll have a helping. And we probably don't need a helping. So when you talk about keeping things in balance,
right,
then it's probably less that you actually need or can tolerate than we actually anticipate. Ultra-processed foods are actually dangerous to our microbes. They tend to starve our good microbes, and they accelerate the bad ones. Not a good idea.
Right. I mean, it's just really interesting. And we did say last time, or we talked in our previous episode, a little bit about super agers and the relationship to microbiomes. Can you share just a bit more into that relationship in the context of what we're describing today?
We can. It involves a word that I find very, very difficult to pronounce. So I'm not even going to bother. It's something like with lots of M's and U's and S's and senses and immunes and stuff like that. It's got
immuno nonsense. That's what it looks like to me, but I don't know if that's it or not.
I don't think either have got our arms around that. But we did talk about super agers, and that's people in their 80s and 90s with a very strong cognitive ability. They've got microbiomes that have a much, much better resemblance than when they were decades younger, when they were in their 30s. And they have greater microbial diversity. They have lower inflammation, and they have lots of good bacteria that are coming into the stomach. It also seems like the microbiome, in addition to all the brain training we've been talking about, the microbiome may have an impact on aging well.
Interesting. I mean, it's just truly fascinating. And in the spirit of learning, which we know is also good for our brains, Phil, I think I learned how to pronounce it. Immunosenescence?
I'll go with that.
No. Immunosenescence. There we go. That's what it is. I had to think about it again. I think it's immunosenescence, I think is phonetically how it's pronounced.
Although I did immunoinnocence. It's got a nice...
It was good too, right? But I do think it's immunosenescence is how I think it phonetically is pronounced. We'll see. I'm sure someone will comment on our video and tell us a little bit about how exactly it's supposed to be pronounced.
How stupid we are for not knowing, probably.
Probably. That's okay too, because I don't mind being wrong.
I don't mind either.
More often than I probably am, than I know I am. But, well, I think this has been a really good conversation. It's really a part 2 to our previous discussion around the gut and brain interaction and, what is actually happening. And then this one diving a little bit further into the microbiome specifically. So what would you like to share in summary with our BrainWise friends around our discussion today before we, kind of say goodbye for now and until next time?
We often talk about the microbiome. It's become de rigueur in many magazines these days. And we tend to focus on the ability it has to help you digest food. But it's also turning around to help us get better brain cognition and shaping our immune systems. So it's a triple whammy, if you like. It digests food, you'll feel better, you'll have a better brain, and you'll become better from an immune point of view.
Very good. Very good. I think it's definitely stuff for us all to take note of as we want to obviously live healthy and long lives. And this will help us to be able to, to some degree, be able to get there. I think some of it's chance, luck, God, whatever it is people might believe in. But, this certainly can help us at least enjoy the life that we're living a little bit more because it helps us to be a bit more healthy. So with that, stay curious, stay compassionate, and always stay BrainWise.